I'm going to call this meeting to order. Mayor Kessis and Bill Peterson aren't with us tonight. So pursuant to the Texas Government Code 551, the City Council of Bastrop, Texas will hold a special workshop meeting on Tuesday, July 5th, 2016 at 6:30 p.m. at the Bastrop City Hall, Council Chambers, 1311 Chestnut Street, Bastrop, Texas, to consider the following call to order, and we have a quorum. And number 2 is the workshop session. The Bastrop City Council will convene into a workshop session with the interim city manager to discuss the following proposed 2016-2017 budget.
I'm going to turn this over to Mike.
This is the first budget workshop for the council. It's to kind of give you a snapshot of where we're at currently and to receive input from the council as to your budgetary issues or concerns. The next slide, let's see if I can do some of that. Okay. We have broken the presentation into a general fund summary for you tonight, your debt service issues, a statement of revenue and expenditures, new requests that we've received from the departments during the course of preparing the budget, our property tax distribution calculation, and our sales tax summary. As you can see by this chart, it's a 10-year history, and we have, over the last 10 years, maintained a tax rate below the 60-cent bar that the council had previously directed. And back in fiscal year 15, we lowered the tax rate down to 56.4, where it has maintained. And the breakdown for this fiscal year is 0.3596 cents for maintenance and operation, generated approximately $2,973,695. Your debt service was 0.2044, which generated $1,689,003, or for total property tax assessment collected of $4,662,698. And as you can look down here at this bottom chart, again, it shows the council a snapshot of how much has been going to O&M and how much has been going to the interest and sinking fund. And I think the important point, which we'll touch on briefly, is the interest and sinking fund portion has been going down, and that has been attributed to some bond refinancing that we've done over the last few years. The general fund maintenance and operation portion of the proposed budget last fiscal year was comprised of reoccurring fixed costs and those identified as a one-time capital type cost. The separation provided the city the ability to balance the budget, reduce the available fund balance, and fund those one-time capital purchases. As you may recall, the capital or one-time expenditures were funded from the fund balance, and these funds were not reoccurring O&M costs. We funded things such as the police department finish out, the new restrooms down in Fisherman's Park. We funded approximately $600,000 in street repairs. Those just a few. And in fiscal year 2016, in order to maintain a 29% fund balance, which is above our financial policy, provided $1,713,000 to be allocated to our one-time cost. The 29% fund balance was higher than our policy of 25% that we maintain. Maintaining a higher fund balance allows the city some flexibility in the event that there is a downturn in sales tax revenue, or to allow for a future capital fund to be funded. The city also believes that the rating agencies like to see a fund balance slightly over the required 25%, and that rang true this last year when we went and refinanced some bonds. In review of the fiscal year 17 budget, it may appear a little different than what you've seen in the past. It appears our preliminary general fund reoccurring revenues will amount to $9,962,842. If compared to the fiscal year 16 total budget revenue, it would appear that our fiscal 17 budget preliminary amount is down from fiscal 16. We have made some accounting changes in how we record the administrative overhead support from the proprietary funds. The council will recall we charge our other funds a percentage of overhead. In the past, we have booked that as revenue, but now a reduction in expense to the various departments and is not booked as a revenue expense. When you factor in this overhead amount, and for comparison purposes, the total revenue for fiscal year 17 would have been $11,067,004. This represents an increase of 7% from the budget of recurring revenues in fiscal year 16, which was $10,252,797. Fiscal year 17 revenues do show slight gains. As a city sales tax, our budget at 3% increases from fiscal year 16. The ad valorem assessed valuations have, at this point, been submitted to us from the appraisal district. It's not the certified tax roll, but the preliminary tax roll shows the assessed value of $846,151,154. So we're getting very close to that 1 billion mark, but I'm sure that amount will come down when the final assessments are received on or before July 31st. At the present time, this will yield an additional 8% due to the increase in valuation from fiscal year 17. As I said, we're anticipating the certified roll hopefully on July 25th, but they have until the 31st to get it to us. The current M&O expenses provided by the department far exceeds the revenues. The departments have requested budget operating expense totaling $11,274,598, which includes new personnel costs totaling $491,000. This budget includes a 2.5 annual step increase at the employee's anniversary date and a 2% COLA, and this was based upon the employment cost index for March of 2016. Balancing the M&O budget while providing departments what they are going to need will be a challenge with that difference. It's just right at $1 million. Again, this just shows the city's debt service requirements. The city only issuance in fiscal 2016 was a refunding of a bond that will have a long-term savings of $364,000. We still have an active projects, the Main Street project, which is going. LED is being designed, and hopefully we hope to go to budget in the next 6 to 7 weeks. And we're still dealing with the extension of Agnes and Hassler Street. But you can see our debt service payments have been fairly constant, and we've been able to achieve that going forward with our bond refinancing. I think the important thing as you look at that chart is our current tax rate at 56.4. Of this, 0.2044 cents is to pay for our general fund debt service. After reviewing our 5-year long-term plan for debt service funds, which include the anticipated future issuance, we feel confident that we can lower our INS rate to 20 cents in those 5 years and still issue additional bonds. Tracy and I ran a scenario that if we did the 2 million, 2 million, 2 million every 2 years, we could maintain the 20 cents and not have to raise taxes for that 5-year period if we staggered out our bonds over that time frame. Sure.
So with refinancing some of those bonds, what is the difference in how much we're going to take on in debt service as opposed, I mean, yes, the debt service is going to go down, but how much is it going to increase?
It depends upon how much the council ultimately decides they want to issue in bonds. And what I just said is as an example, at one point we had a discussion of issuing $6 million in bonds. If we issued 6 million, but we issued 2 million every 2 years, our projections are we would not have to raise our debt service requirement.
Okay.
Could I ask you one question?
Sure.
I don't know if it's this page or page, what page is that to you, Mike? That's 5. I'll wait till the next page.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'll wait till the next page.
Okay. This is the preliminary revenue and expenditures. And this is our ad valorem, our sales tax we talked about. Those are our two biggest accounts. And I think what's interesting, and this trend is now across the whole state of Texas, but your sales tax is now your number one source of your revenue coming in, and that's what other cities in Texas now see. It used to be your property tax, but now it's your sales tax. Down below here represents your actual for the previous fiscal year, your budgeted, your projected, and what we're projecting for fiscal year 17. If you look down there at the bottom, we have total expenditures of $11 million. If we were to just leave it at that, we would still have an ending fund balance of 1.7, but that only gives us a 17% coverage, which is below our policy. So we've got to bring those expenditures down to get us back up to at least, and I'm going to try to shoot for a 27% coverage.
Excuse me, Mike, that was a question I was going to ask. So basically with that 11.2 million dollars in expenditures versus the 9.9 in revenues. So basically you're over, that 1.3 is the difference in, if you brought that even squared, you could get that up, you could get the 25% to 27 or 29?
I'm shooting to bring our fund balance to 27%, because I think it needs to be, as I spoke earlier, above the 25% of our policy. Our policy says 25%, but that's a guideline, and so that means I've got to bring expenditures down more, a bit more to get us to that 27% mark. This is just a snapshot, and Tracy's done a very good job of putting this together. This shows your expenditures request by departments. The red has been put in as to identify a one-time expenditure versus an ongoing expenditure such as personnel and things of this nature. Information technology has a variety of hard software programs. They're proposing a filming department. That will be a revenue generator. The police department, we created an equipment replacement fund. So we're purchasing 3, but we're only using $61,000 of general fund money because of the equipment replacement fund that you all created back a few months ago with the excess funds we had from the previous year. The fire department is calling for part-time staff during the day and some additional emergency service equipment for the department. That's your one-time expenditure.
You're saying black and blue every year.
Yes. The planning department has called for a number of studies to be done. A drainage study in conjunction with Bastrop County for Piney Creek and Gills Branch. We were awarded a Parks and Wildlife grant to create a trail. Our matching portion is $160,000. A home repair program of $20,000. Form-based code, $50,000. Historic design standards, $75,000. Historic preservation survey, $50,000. And a unified development code of $100,000. Public Works, contract clearing for Gills Branch, an attachment for the track loader for the excavator. Let's see, a boom attachment, excuse me, and we're funding the trucks, 3 trucks out of the vehicle replacement fund and not charging any to the operation budget. They're requesting a facility maintenance worker in the Parks Department as well as a groundskeeper. They're calling for the replacement of the playscape at Ferry Park, river stabilization, which I think is going to happen this year because after the flood, there was so much erosion of the banks down at the Colorado River near the park that has increased in priority. A shade at Jules Park, and then lighting. Also calling for a recreation coordinator, contract services with BISD for open play and maintenance and repair. The library is calling for their public use desktops replacement, a new reference collection librarian, Spanish language collection, ESL instructor, and Read Square software. So those are just a snapshot of your major capital items. This is, sure.
Down at the bottom, you had everything in the red could be funded, $800,000 out of excess fund balance. Over and beyond that 1.7 million? That's that? Is that it?
You would take,
So if you took 800,000 out of it, you leave 900,000 in fund balance?
No, what the red indicates is out of the 1.6, 800,000 of it would be when you're present time.
what,
Yeah. It's just that the 800,000, it's out of the 1.6. The 1.6 is the total requests. So out of that, 800,000 is your one-time capital type purchases that could be funded out of
out of your
fund balance. Could be.
Out of the ending fund balance, or I'm asking, what would it bring that ending fund balance that you just said on page 5 was 1.775?
It would only work out if we were able to keep the operating fund balance at above the 25%.
I'll come back to that.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
you're gonna have to bring your expenses down to get you up to that 25%. So that, I think that's what she's trying to say, we're gonna have to play with that number, because if you did it like it currently calls for, you're gonna be below your 25%. Yes, sir. Exactly. This is assuming that the assessed valuation remains at 846 million, which we know from experience is not going to be the case. There's still property protests going on. But if it was to remain at that with a 56.4 tax rate, 36.4 would generate approximately 3.2 million for M&O and 1.8 for your debt service. And this just shows our historical collection of our sales tax and how it has grown. Only had 1 year that we went below budget, but I think the thing that's most interesting, if you look from fiscal year 06 to fiscal year 16, you went from $2 million to $4.3 million in sales tax collection. That's a pretty phenomenal growth in your sales tax collection. And that happened over a 10-year time frame. So that's a quick thumbnail sketch for you to see where we're at with the budget. Cuts are going to have to be made, there's no question about that. We're going through that process now, but we're at the point where we need to hear from the council, your concerns and things of that nature.
Mike, let me ask you a question. These numbers were prepared before last week's meeting when we had guests come in and talk about the drainage issues we had throughout the city, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, the only thing I see anything concerning and is Gills Branch and Piney Creek at $70,000 study.
And plus, we put some contract maintenance in there to follow up the work we did last year to do additional cleanup.
Okay. You know, my deal, and I'm just one person out of 6 people up here. I tell you what, the crews have done a super job in 4 or 5 days down there on Gills Branch at College Street, back to the south toward where they had the problems with the utility poles. They've done if people took time to go down there and look, they've done a super job. So you thank them, but we just can't totally focus on all our time and money on Gills Branch alone, because I think cleaning it out, it'll take it a long way. But we got areas on the north part of town, we got to address how we keep water off the people from Hill Street to Pecan Street, and I don't see any dollars for those in this deal. And I think the priorities changed when this came out. That's why I've asked you. This came out before we spoke to the citizens last week, so I think some priorities are going to have to change on as far as where we're spending these general fund dollars.
I don't disagree. This was scheduled 2 weeks ago, and then these numbers that you see tonight were prepared 2 weeks ago. No. Okay, let's try again. Now? There. You're right, Mr. De La Rosa. These numbers here were prepared 2 weeks ago when we initially anticipated having this budget workshop. And then last week, we heard from the citizens. So there is going to have to be some reprioritization based upon what we heard. And, but we didn't want to get into changing a bunch of numbers just until we heard from y'all.
Mike, I'm sorry. Okay. Have we started putting together a budget of money for addressing drainage issues?
We have put some budgetary numbers together to address the flooding that occurred on Highway 95, as well as the Hill Street drainage, as well as some improvements at Piney Ridge, some significant improvements on Gills Branch. And I will say that that is going to be several $1 million. The preliminary numbers that we've put together, I would think that's something the council is going to have to give consideration to because of the magnitude of the expenditures to fix the problems that you heard last Tuesday night through some type of bond, whether you want to do certificates of obligations or a general bond. That will be up to the council. But we're talking roughly $4 to $5 million easy of all the areas I just talked about.
You talked about those areas, but there are some areas you didn't mention just now. Will they be addressed too? And are we working with an engineering company to figure this out?
Yes, we had a meeting last week with Mr. Cooper and the staff and myself. We're looking at the areas that were impacted the most. And for example, the 95 drainage improvements that we're talking about also tie into Hill Street. We're talking about options of what we can do with the Hill Street retention basin to make it increase its capacity. And with what could be done there, where would the area of improvement be? And we've shadowed over that it's a much larger area than just Hill Street.
You said before that there was a possibility of a grant to help look at a big overview study for the drainage issues that we have.
That's our contribution of the first item that you saw, and I mentioned in conjunction with Bastrop County. There's some matching funds that our funds will go towards that would look at, basically those funds are for Gills Branch and Piney Creek. That drainage study that you're talking about.
Okay, so the county will also be looking at Piney Creek where our duties end.
Yes.
And where theirs begin, because I understand there are some real problems there.
Right, but it's my understanding it's done in conjunction with Bastrop County. They're a participant in that drainage study.
Okay, so let me just review real quick. You're saying that we are taking steps to address drainage for all the places that had a problem.
Right.
And we're focusing on certain areas that have been pointed out as the culprits, basically, for backing up or causing problems in the rest of the areas. So, in other words, when we see people working in one area, it doesn't mean that they're forgetting a different area. Everybody's going to get addressed.
That's our approach, and what we're using, again, maybe I'm not making myself clear, but if you recall last Tuesday night, we showed a map that illustrated an area that had been in all the areas in the city that had been impacted by the flooding. And so what the approach we've tried to take is, if, let's just say we did some drainage improvement on Fayette Street. Okay, is Fayette Street the only part that's going to be affected by those improvements, or are there areas outside of Fayette Street that are going to be affected? And that's what we're trying to look at, is not just a Pacific area, but what do we have to do to expand that, especially those areas that were hardest hit, so that if we do an improvement, it kind of mushrooms out.
That is great. So would I be correct if I said that Trey and you and our interim city manager, Steve Adcock, and planning are all working together on this, so everybody's on the same page, and people can ask just about any of those people, of those 4 that I mentioned, if they happen to see them in the grocery store, and find out what's going on, because we're all paying attention to this, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to reinforce what Willie said, and that I think our priorities have changed from when the budget was put together, and obviously you said they have, and we need to restack the budget in view of the new priorities that we've set. Obviously, our budget, I doubt, is going to cover if we're going to have to spend $5 million to fix the problems or something of that magnitude, that we would plug into our budget the engineering requirements to figure out what we got to do and put a plan together, and then we'll have to see how we're going to fund that, probably through bonds.
Yes, and to address that, that's why the first study is very important, because it involves just more than the city, and it's going to take both the county and the city working together. Secondly, I think there are some improvements that can be done in-house so that we can at least show to the public that we listened to what they said last Tuesday night, and that gets back to looking at the area that's been impacted and where can we do improvements that will, what I call for life, have a bigger mushroom impact by making that improvement by doing it in-house. And we've identified 2 or 3 areas where we could possibly do some good and not give you a little breathing room before you decide how much bonds you want to issue for doing certain drainage improvements.
Yep.
Let me say one, can I catch you before, please?
Sure.
Mike, one of the concerns I have, and most of the citizens that were here the other night, they got up before us and talked, I mean, we need a plan, and we need a good plan, and when I say it like that, their concern is if we identify what the costs are and we put it on a bond package and it doesn't pass, what's our next option? What do we do?
Well, one of the things we've done since last Tuesday night, we're trying to get the court to come down here and see what they will allow us to do. A good example was that picture that with the big tree right down in the center of the Gills Branch drainageway. It's hard for me to accept that we got to get a core permit to cut a tree down. That's a major drainage impediment to our drainage. So what we're hoping for is to get a little flexibility from the Corps to address some of the obstructions that you saw last Tuesday night to help the water flow down to the Colorado River better than it is now. The long-term best solution for Gills Branch, even by enhancing a lot of the obstructions, is to widen it and deepen it, because it really needs to act as 2 functions. One as a drainage channel, and second as a retention basin for those big storm floods. But hopefully, by getting the Corps down here and seeing some of the issues that we're dealing with, again, giving us some flexibility. You know, we didn't bring up the other night, but, you know, 3 years ago, we didn't have an easement on Gills Branch. Today, we have 100 easements that we went out and got, which was a result of that SSTAT study. So we did respond to that, and hopefully by the next council meeting, we'll have gotten the rest of them all the way to the river. And we have been given some FEMA funding, at least to clear it out to the river, which will help again. So we're trying to do as much as we can with as many options, and the olive branch has been extended to the Corps. We heard loud and clear from the public last Tuesday night, and we're trying really hard to get the Corps down here as soon as we can.
Okay, firstly, I'd like to say it took 2 days for somebody to remove that tree after Mr. Goldsmith showed those pictures the other night. So whoever removed that tree or got the right people to remove that tree, thank you, thank you, thank you. I have a sneaking suspicion it might have had something to do with our Public Works Department, so thank you so much. Secondly, I'd like to ask our Public Safety Officer, since FEMA came and we are now a national disaster, I flooded too, and fortunately, I have flood insurance, so the FEMA people are not going to be able to help me in any way, which I understand, and that's fine. I understand they can help some of the other people, but as a city, will FEMA be able to help us in any way fund any of the repairs that are needed to do to keep this from happening again that you know of?
The answer is yes, as long as we are deemed for public assistance. Last I've checked, we have not, and I just got it verified. The federal government still has not considered it for public assistance. When that occurs, people need to understand that public assistance does not mean that the city's going to get money and we're going to disperse it to the citizens. That money is only for our infrastructures that were damaged or to prevent stuff, such as our roads that were damaged, the cost of public works, in order for those power poles and stuff like that. So the answer is yes, but I think public assistance, it's confusing because people do think that it's for the citizens, and it's not. It's individual assistance, it's for the citizens, which we have been deemed for that, and it is open, at this point.
When will we know something about if the city is going to get assistance? And do you have any idea what kind of assistance that might be?
It's the federal government, so anybody's guess, to be honest with you. I don't know, but when the president does give us public assistance, it's usually for everything. Now, we have a 25% match, but that 25% match can be in kind. But it's for anything that the city was out, from fixing the floods to the roads to public works, anything like that.
Just to give you a corollary, Ms. McAnally, the FEMA money that we got to clean out Gills Branch was a result of the fire. And
oh, I see, yeah.
And that was to clean out areas that had debris and things that could easily catch on fire and cause a neighborhood to catch on fire. So it's going to be something along, it'll probably be more expansive this time because we were much harder hit than we were with the fire, but it will be from flood control issues because that's what caused the damage, where before we were dealing with fire issues.
Well, again, and Mr. De La Rosa said it last time, thank you, everybody. All of staff shined through this whole thing, especially Public Works and our electric department and public safety and police. I haven't quit hearing about how wonderful our police are, so thank you again.
I'm going to make one more comment if I can. Oh, I'm sorry, Deborah, go ahead. I didn't see you over there.
A few things. Are we able to use that 2011 study right now as a framework for any type of work we're doing versus having to wait on any additional studies?
I think one area that we could use the SSTAT study in now that we have easements all the way from 95 to the railroad tracks. One of the things the SDAT study called for is off-basin detention. And if you recall, I mentioned earlier that in order to get Gills Branch to operate properly is two things. One, we got to get the channel, and we got to widen it because it's going to act as a retention. One of the recommendations out of the SDAT study was do what's called off-site detention, so that once the water starts to flood up, that you could catch that water, to divert that water into your detention pond. Again, they identified a couple of areas, and we are looking at potentially some off-site detention. What it would require would be the council would probably have to buy some property for us to construct those detention ponds.
The other question I have is we've had this increase in sales tax. Can a significant amount of that money be directed towards drainage, or at least a proportion of it to offset any sort of, instead of just trying to put all that towards bonds?
Sales tax is not normally used, you can use it to service debt, but you normally use your property tax. But the council can divert whatever portion of sales tax you determine feasible to address any issue in the council or in the city you wish.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask you is, just what I understand about the Corps of Engineers is typically maintenance issues are not something that maintenance for work that you've already done, and for work that's already been approved by the Corps of Engineers, maintenance is not something you have to go back and get studies for. That maintenance is, if it takes you back to where you were, what's making this different to where we're having to pull them in for what would typically be, I think, maintenance issues?
I agree with you. The issue becomes that over time, the drainage basin has filled in with silt, and it's viewed by the Corps as a navigable waterway. So to get in there and start digging out your ditches and widening them, they perceive that as potentially changing the navigable waterway, and that's why they request that you get a permit. But that's why I said from the beginning, we're trying to get them down here so that maybe what they are saying on paper isn't practical, that what we need to do out there, and they'll give us some leniency.
Does it have to do with mitigation? Is that the main issue, just permitting where you're going to put that for mitigation? If by doing improvements to Gills Branch, and as a result of that, you have enhanced an area, you'll get credit for that from the Corps. They'll actually give you credit for mitigating an area that was potentially prone to flooding, but because of the improvements that were undertaken, you've not only enhanced the drainage basin, but you've enhanced the area around it. They view that as a mitigation improvement. And what that means is rather than having to pay them for mitigation, they'll give you credit for mitigation. But I'm talking about, I guess, the negative positive of that is what you're doing with what you're mitigating.
Right. I mean, you've got to show an improvement. Yes, ma'am.
Got one more question, Mike. I don't have and someone else may have their schedule with them or their calendar on the next budget session that we're having, but until I get some more definite numbers, Fayette Street bothers me a little bit in the way from Cedar Street down this way. I don't know how far down it concerns me, but because of the railroad right-of-way, I don't know which side that we can do some improvements. Some of the damage up closer to Cedar Street, I don't know where we could have done a better job with coordination with the school on how they brought water out to Fayette Street.
One of the things we talked about Friday.
Where I'm going with this, Mike, is that on this 1.6 million or 1.15 million that you identified as costs, until I see where we're at with some firm numbers on drainage, because to me, drainage is way ahead of a lot of this stuff you have on here, and I won't sign off to any of this till I see where we got money to spend on drainage.
Right, and again, like I said, we did these 2 weeks ago, we met last Friday. One of the areas that we think we can do a fairly easy repair that will have a big impact is over on Fayette Street. When I got here in 2006, we actually ran down Chamber Street a 24-inch drainage pipe from Cedar Street all the way down to Gills Branch. What we talked about on Friday is up at Fayette Street, where the road sits higher than the ground, put some inlets in there and tie into that 24-inch pipe that we put in 10 years ago, and it'll drain that water off that's ponding in and around that area of Fayette Street where those people complain. That's a pretty inexpensive fix that we can do in-house.
So you're sending the water back that way?
We're going to send it, we're going to pick it up at Fayette, we're going to bring it right
Bring it
over
back
here.
up?
Yes. And Gene was in the meeting. Gene designed that project. We think that, as we recall, it's been a while, but we think that drainage pipe's only down about 5 foot. So that's something we can do in-house and fairly quickly. So those are the things we're trying to look at. We are trying to address exactly what you said.
Yeah, thank you, Mike.
I have 2 questions that are a little bit off what we're talking about right now. Is that okay? Okay. One is you were talking about the sinking fund, and all the reduction that you're talking about, the INS fund, is really going to be coming from the interest side and the redoing those bonds. I mean, the sinking fund is going to be maintained at a certain level.
Okay. Terminology. When you create debt, the bond covenants require that you create what we call, for lack of a better word, an interest and sinking fund. And that's where you put in your monies to pay your debt payments. But what we've done, I think, and Tracy's done a very good job, is we have projected out for 5 years. And we feel very confident, again, that we can hold it at 20 cents, not raise taxes. And if we stagger our bonds appropriately, we can issue about $6 million in bonds and not have to raise that 20 cents.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, the other thing I wanted to ask you, when you were talking about the Main Street Sidewalk Replacement Program, is the reason that those funds haven't been spent just because that bond was put back out for reduction on interest, or I just wanted you to bring some clarification on that.
A couple of things. One, it was postponed because we didn't know the impact the overpasses were going to be having in the downtown traffic, and we didn't want to create more traffic issues in and around the downtown. We've seen an increase in traffic, but we don't think it's going to impact those improvements. Secondly, at the inception of that project, a survey was done. Half the sidewalks are on private property and half the sidewalks are in public property. As of this afternoon, we have 55% of the easements obtained. And I've got our Main Street Director and my the administrative assistant for the city manager, Ms. Chavez, as a high priority to get those easements finished up so we can go out to bid for that project. But those bonds have been issued, and that's why it's referenced in your budget packet tonight. Those are bonds that have remained unspent at this point. The only other thing, there was quite a lot of discussion a year or two ago regarding the configuration of parking, especially on the south side of Main Street. And did we want to widen the sidewalks or did we not? I did go to BEDC and see if they were opening to widen the sidewalks. They said they're going to stick with their original project. I think the arrangement that's out there now is working very well. The only thing that really needs to be addressed that has received a lot of complaints are those islands out there. People want to see those pulled back in and do away with that little gap between the island and the sidewalk. And that can be very easily handled through a design factor.
This is all workshop, are we allowed to go and speak? Without having done all the form?
Yeah, excuse me, I got a bad habit. Go ahead, Richard. Yeah, sure.
So a couple of things observed. I don't see, for the internal city attorney, I don't see a line item budgeted for it. I don't know if it's sitting in the organization expenditures, but there's 160, 170,000 that hasn't been accounted for. I don't see any funds to remediate 921 Main Street, if we're going to talk about it this year. As far as the drainage project, have we considered a PID? I know PID is a bad word, but instead of going bonds and doing a 6-year thing, if you do a PID for drainage, it's giving forever. It would fund drainage here infinitum. It's just a thought I have. And then on Main Street bond, when does that have to start getting spent so it doesn't expire? Questions I have. Thank you.
I'll try to answer a majority of your questions. On the Main Street, that's why we're moving up, trying to get those easements. And we met with the Main Street manager this afternoon, being a high priority for her to get the remaining 45% of the easements that we need. The council had more or less established a threshold of once we got to 75 to 80% of the easements, we would be turned loose to go do the design work. And then when we got to 90, 95%, they were willing to go out and bid for that project. So we're going to be pushing that very hard. Yes, soon.
When do we start spending the bond?
We will start spending the bond when we start design.
Okay, so I keep hearing this rumor that at the end of 2016, if we haven't spent a penny, we don't get it.
Yeah.
I just want someone to correct that rumor. Okay, so it's available?
It's
past
available,
2016.
and it's a restricted fund that can only be used for that project.
Okay, so it doesn't have a timeline on it, it doesn't expire, funds are there until we get ready to spend it.
Only thing is, the longer we wait, the more expensive it gets.
Understand.
Okay?
Okay.
The second item you raised, or your earlier item, this budget does have a cap. The council established by a motion that when we develop the budget, that legal fees be capped at 220. This legal fees are being capped at 200, and that's what we're going forth with a budget on the legal fees, not to exceed $200,000.
Right, and so on the city attorney line item that Gary brought forward, where's it at?
It's inside the line item budgets.
Okay,
Yes, sir. And then it's going to be up to the council how they want to proceed with the 921 lot. We're trying to get that information that they asked for here next week for them. I'm confident we'll have the updated cost and everything. I just don't know about the appraisal, but that's our goal.
okay, and then PID for drainage?
That's an option. Another option, when I was city manager down in the valley, the city actually created a drainage district for the whole city. And if you know the valley, it's all flat. And we actually did an assessment on the utility bills, and that money all went into a fund that did nothing but do drainage work, because if we didn't keep the drainage channels cleaned out in Mission, and when we had a 10-inch rain down there, it really flooded. And that's how we kept the drainage canals cleaned
Yeah,
out.
I mean, I heard your plan for moving the water off of Fayette into Gills. Gills is already full.
Yes, but that water, based upon the pictures I took on the flood, that water ultimately is getting into Gills Branch. We're just going to bring it in at a different point.
Okay.
It's not the panacea that we like to see, but we're trying to make where areas again were really impacted. Where can we make some improvements quickly to help those people? And on Fayette Street, the road sits up about 1.5 feet higher than the foundations of the homes.
Okay, so one goofy question. Is it G-I-L apostrophe S branch or G-I-L-L apostrophe branch? I see it spelled both ways.
I've always spelled it G-I-L-L-S.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. But I am looking into the statutory requirements for a drainage district, because I can just assure you, Mission was much bigger than Bastrop, and we could not have handled the hurricane season and the drainage issues if we did not have that drainage district.
Matt, let me ask. Okay. Do you remember we did a comprehensive plan, like a 2000 to 220 or something? I can't remember what it was for, but we did a comprehensive plan a while back. Do you remember that, Mike?
I remember something. We did a lot of ideas and programs, yes, ma'am.
Was there a drainage study on that? And there was not a drainage study on that, and was that because we didn't have a problem?
I think more of the reason we didn't, the reason that we didn't, I think, was because part of that work was to update our comprehensive plan, which is going to have a drainage section. Now, in the comprehensive plan, I don't want to create false impression. It's going to identify areas of the city that need improvements, but it's not going to get into the details. And hopefully it will help the council prioritize the most impacted areas so that you can best allocate your money.
Sure. So that's the new updated comprehensive plan.
Yes.
So the first one did not have a drainage section at all.
It may have, but again, it was very general, just identifying the drainage basins and things. This study that we're asking for to be funded for Gills Branch and Piney Creek, that was started back in 2006 and just never got done. And now it's coming back again. And our interest, of course, is since the county's going to participate, it makes more sense for us to be participating.
Yeah, great, thanks.
And again, I don't want to lose sight. We may want to give consideration to a drainage district because of the magnitude of the issues that we're going to have to deal with. And that money has to be spent on drainage. You can't spend salaries. You can pay for, we paid for equipment and we paid for a crew, and all they did year-round was clean out drainage ditches.
I think a lot of people in Bastrop would be very interested to hear more about those options. Thanks for bringing them up, Richard. And if you could let us know.
Oh, I will, because like I said, and I think the really good part about it is it went on the water bill. It didn't go on the tax bill. So this was a monthly fee that came in every month. And when I got there, they had a whole bunch of money and just didn't spend it. And so we put together a drainage plan. We had the money to buy the equipment, and then we went to work. And we had a 10-inch rain about a year and a half after I got there. And if we hadn't done the work we had got accomplished that day, Mission would have been underwater.
Well, let's keep Bastrop from being underwater again. That sounds like a plan to study that. Thank you.
Mike, one more quick question. Where did you say that the county was going to participate with the city in on this?
They're going to pick up, and Wes here, why don't you, Wes, I don't want to say it wrong, so why don't you correct me when I misspoke.
Council, yes, the grant that was awarded to the county in 2007 was awarded by the Texas Water Development Board, and it helps fund drainage projects anywhere in the county. And so because the county was awarded the grant, that's who we participate through. And it's a 50-50 match to where the Water Development Board would pick up 50% of the cost and the city would pay the other 50%. The county is sort of the vehicle that we go through to participate in the grant. And so the scope of work that we've received from their consultant was roughly $140,000. And so that's where the $70,000 expenditure that we're showing came from.
Where does that work area include for that $70,000?
It includes the limits of Piney Creek and Gills Branch from where they enter the river up to the eastern city limit line. Roughly Highway 95, but of course that's just the limit of the detailed study. They'll still make assumptions based on, like for instance in Piney Creek, they'll look at the floodgate timing records for for Lake Bastrop, and they'll make very good estimates of how much flow to account for upstream of those areas. But everywhere in between that eastern limit and the Colorado River will be studied in detail that would show the impacts of flooding that we see today, as well as a prioritized list of projects that could be further performed later, and they would be prioritized in terms of benefit as well as economic benefit, cost-wise. And another important piece of that is the order that you do those projects. And you don't want to do one project that would just move a problem downstream onto somebody else. And so that study would look at projects all along those two waterways.
And Wes, didn't you mention on Friday that some of the detention ponds, like off of Gills Branch, would be something that they would look at as well?
That's correct. So speaking about the economic cost-benefit issues, they would look at projects that would give us the most bang for our buck, if you will. There's Mr. Talbot's talked about the mitigation costs that would be required if we're working directly inside those channels. And there's projects that we could look at that are outside of the channel that don't require the mitigation costs, but would still provide a tremendous benefit to that watershed.
Well, go ahead. Ms. Coffey, go ahead and speak.
Is that timeline, when might this study be done?
So the timeline that the consultant's given us is they can have, if they started soon, they could have their preliminary projects by the end of the year.
And Ms. Coffey, we talked Friday, and we think that we can get this pushed up. And if we do, then we'll be coming to the council for a budget amendment to get this moved up.
So let me ask you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. One other question. But what you're saying, what I hear you say is there's things that we can start on right now. We don't have to wait for this. So we have plenty to do that actually you've already started doing stuff,
and
right?
Mr. Jobe could speak to that a lot better than I could, but certainly there's, sort of a three-step approach. There's the immediate short-term things that we can do that make a benefit today, and then there's the medium-term and the longer-term, more expensive projects that we look at down the road.
I'm going to say one thing when I understand that. The only frustration I have on this whole part is TxDOT. And I wish somebody that's in charge of that office up there on Highway 21 by the park would have came down here and saw the mess that our crews cleaned up, that they're responsible for. All those pictures Mr. Goldsmith showed the other night in concrete, the state's responsible for, not the city of Bastrop, but we're doing their work for them. And you're talking about getting county help. We should be getting some kind of help from the state, because that's their deal, not the city of Bastrop. And they haven't taken any kind. If they've had these issues and they see them on issues, read the paper. Somebody from their office is ashamed that they can't come down to our city hall meeting tonight and speak up and say we're here to help you and do what we can. But they're not going to show up, and it's all on y'all's back here in the city to go in there and do that cleanup for them.
Well, I understand what you're saying, sir, but we are having a meeting with TxDOT this week over that very issue.
Well, we've already cleaned it.
I know, but we're setting the groundwork to get their assistance going forward.
We need money.
I know.
I mean, the other part is at the end by the sewer plant where Bob Long's property is on Gills Branch, where it comes out there. I'm sure I heard that's an area that needs to be cleaned out as well, because that water's backing up. But I've heard from people in the construction business that said you'd be surprised if the city just went out and gave Gills Branch a good cleaning. You'd be amazed at what you're going to see on this flow as far as flow of water. But I'm going to get back into when it gets to the railroad bridge on on College Street and under the underpass on 71, that's all state maintained, and they haven't done anything for us in years.
And I share your concerns, because if you look at the new access road that they're putting in for the 71 overpass, it's tipped right down, right directly at that drainage ditch.
And they already laid drainage pipe into the Gills Branch, so that's more water coming into Gills Branch.
Right.
Thank you.
I've got a question, Willie.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, if Public Works is going to give us some insight as to what you plan to do and what can be done, what Ms. Jones was talking about just now, while we're waiting around, what things we can be doing and how much manpower we can spare for it. I don't know that you're prepared today, but is there a time when you can? So you're saying we'll see something for the next council meeting? That would be wonderful.
He has put together a program.
Okay.
And he will be showing it at the next council meeting.
I think there will be a lot of people looking forward to that, Trey. Thanks.
Forgiveness is easier than permission.
Any direction from Mary, in regards to our next budget meeting, as far as general fund? Other than what I mean, coming back with some numbers on potential drainage projects in the future in regards to the budget they presented tonight?
You talking to me?
I'm talking to anybody at the council that's listening that.
Well, I mean, the only thing that I brought up earlier is just looking at authorizing a directive of some of this sales tax money. I think that's something that we need to look at, because I heard that from the citizens, that they found it really hard, that they were going to have to take on additional tax with bond money to do something that really maybe was something that we should be, handling elsewhere. And I just want us to look at that as a council as one of the options.
Well, let me see if I understand you right, because I know where you go. Now, sales taxes is the biggest part of our general fund, so tonight we're talking about general fund spending. So you're talking about any dollars that are received by the city over and above what we budgeted for. You're asking if that could be used for any of the drainage work, or is that something else that you're asking?
I think that, yes, that's exactly what I'm asking, and I think that's something we have to give permission for, according to what Mike said, and I just want us to look at that as an option.
Can I just throw
versus all bond?
I'd like to float one other thing out. Last year when we had our budget workshop, we talked about critical needs. And we all sat through here last Tuesday night and we heard people, and they truly expressed the critical needs. As you've seen by our charts here, that if we staggered our bonds, it would have no impact on your rate for your debt service. And my question is, would the council be open to a $2 million CO to go out there with both operating funds and debt funds and hit this hard and fast and really make a dent?
I'll answer that if I can. I've never been a big fan of COs, never have. But in lieu of what we're facing with the drainage issues and the catch-up we're trying to play with, after our next meeting, that we come back with some more concrete numbers on what you talked about, the Chambers Street, Fayette Street, and especially off 95 to Hill Street and Pecan Street. I'd definitely look at issuing those $2 million in COs to alleviate that drainage problem if we have to.
I agree.
That's all I ask, is if you'll be interested. That's all I want to know. It'll make the effort worthwhile, knowing that you're open to looking at it.
I think that's a great plan.
And the reason I'm saying, Mike, is because that's the only backup that we have, really. If we put it on the ballot in May and it fails, then we have an avenue to go and get money to take care of that.
I'm mindful of Mr. Kindred, who said that he would rather see this not come from any sort of outside source money for mitigation. I don't see any other way around this. You're right, we need to hit it hard and fast and keep this from happening again, and I would be very interested. Thank you, Mike.
I do have, and this is a little bit off point, but there's been studies that have been provided to the council, and I think of two recently, and one was the 921 study that I believe it was the Downtown Business Association did, and then the other one was the study done by the BDEC for a proposal for 921. And how do we get those?
We have developed 2 or 3 in-house, and I can put those together for you. And the Downtown Business Association did produce one. I will try to get it for you and just put them all together for you.
Maybe wouldn't all the council members like to see those, or? Yeah, I think so too. I would like to see those studies, so.
We've all seen them. It won't hurt us to see them again. Thanks.
Mike, you have anything else? Chief, anything else on the preliminary budget on the general fund for tonight? No comments from the audience? Your deal.
The only comment, well, I would add one comment before that, and that is that obviously throwing back onto the city team to really drill down on the budget numbers to balance this thing out. We have to trim some serious money here, and I would hope that the next round will come back closer to balanced. And with that, I move for adjournment.
Hang on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Bastrop City Council will adjourn workshop session and reconvene into special session to take any next necessary action.
I move for adjournment.
Second.
Motion been made and seconded, adjourn. All in favor? Thank you all.